All right, well, thanks, folks. I think that our recording, there we go, is beginning. I want to welcome you all to an intermittent anthropology colloquium speaker. We haven't had a chance to have many of these during the pandemic, but it's great that we have some. I have an introduction for our speaker that I'll give in a minute. Jonathan, I don't know if you want to say anything as the chair before we begin. Oh, you're on mute.
No, I didn't have anything prepared. I figured this was your show.
Okay.
Welcome, of course.
Well, thanks for being here. Okay, well then I will begin. All right, we're pleased to welcome our speaker for today. Pedro Guillermo Ramoncelis is a PhD candidate in the Department of Anthropology at Indiana University Bloomington. He holds master's degrees in anthropology from IU and from the Center for Research and Advanced Studies in Social Anthropology. As a recipient of fieldwork grants from a variety of sources, including IU's Tinker Program and the Office of the Vice President for International Affairs, and is also a 2020-2021 Digital Knowledge Sharing Fellow with the American Philosophical Society. This APS-funded project takes an overtly decolonial approach to anthropological histories and futures by drawing on the archives of Elsie Clues Parsons to translate into Spanish and Zapotec her field notes from the 1930s and returning them and their information to the town of Mitla, which was the focus of her data collection at that time. He's also involved in a nonprofit that works with people on the Isthmus of Tehuantepec to understand how people relate to their patrimony and heritage, and an active member of the International Council of Monuments and Sites of UNESCO, serving as the secretary of the Scientific Committee on Archaeological Heritage Management for the chapter in Mexico. And the work with UNESCO includes public outreach, the creation of a national atlas of sites, seminars to promote archaeological heritage, and work to update national protocols for heritage sites. Very busy. Today he'll be presenting a talk entitled, Documenting Site Meetings and Land Use Practices in Tehuantepec, Oaxaca, Building a Collaborative Archaeological Project. So join me in a very digital, but hopefully very warm welcome for our speaker today. Thank you so much. I'll hand it over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Story, and thank you for the opportunity to speak in this Louisville University of Louisville Anthropology Department. I'm very honored to speak in front of you all. So I will share my screen. Sorry, it's a different way of the that I'm getting used to Zoom calls and all of this, so this new interface is new for me. So
I understand entirely.
So just well, this is like the classes that I teach. Can you make a reaction or something if you can see my slides? It's working, right?
Yes, we can see.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, yeah. The focus of my research is based in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec in southern Mexico. This region has been like well known in modern times as a long distance exchange link, right? For example, in the Second World War, it was like the main point of crossing of the Americas between a lot of the machinery, work supplies and etc. from the European front to the Pacific war front, right? So it has always been like a strategic point of crossing of the continent, right? Because it's one of the narrowest parts of the Americas. Because of that, it has usually been of particular interest of colonial powers such as the French Empire and in the 19th century, the British Empire has at some point like some interest there, USA, of course, and China in the last century. So, and this is because it's a point of transcontinental commerce, right? because of that, it's also a place of conflict between these extractive companies and government projects versus indigenous collectives. And for me, it has always been like an interesting how these conflicts have been like rooted in this place, right? What's the history and what's the diachronical process of all these conflicts that we can see right now in this particular place? So that's like one part of the things that help, conduct me to do research in this place, right? To understand how this particular political landscape came to be. So this is how this can looks like. Well, today there's like 5 indigenous groups in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec: Zapotecs, Chontals, Huaves, Soques, and Mijes, right? And there's also like an important immigration population from China, the Lebanon, and other parts of Central America, right? But this merge of peoples have like a long history. So I'm having a problem here. Yeah. So my project has focused on that, right? Understand how the indigenous population, which is like the Zapotec population specifically, have turned into be the most important indigenous group in the region. So in order to do that, I choose a specific site in the area, right? And all of this to explain the Zapotec colonialism and how the indigenous displacement of all these other indigenous groups happened. In this image that I am showing you, for example, is the first map that we have like a notice of the region. It was a map produced by the King of Spain. Is a geographic relation of Tehuantepec, and it was done in 1570, right? And at this point of 1517, which is half of a century after the Spaniards arrived to the region, we have a political landscape dominated by the Zapotec group. So this political landscape has like in the middle point the Tehuantepec town, right? As you can see in the middle, there's like this hill with a little jaguar. That's the Tecuani. So Tehuantepec means the hill of the jaguar, right? Right, but Zapotecs, just we know that because of historical documents, historical chronicles, and their own myths and stories. We know that they came from other region, right? They arrived in the last part of the post-classic times. This is the last before the like 1 century before the Spaniards arrived here. They came from the central valleys of the Oaxaca, which is the roughly around 200 kilometers northwest from the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, and it's different, a way different environment. It's a semi-arid region, and that's the homeland from the Zapotec population. And actually nowadays Zapotecs are aware of that migration process, right? That took place at some point in the 14th century of our epoch. Well, in those stories that Zapotecs has, and this is corroborated by the ethnohistorical record, they built a series of fortresses to consolidate their power in the region. And one of these first fortresses was what we now know as the archaeological city of Giangola, right? This city has been the focus of research, and not many research, but but there has been like other archaeologists that have worked there. For example, in 1889, there was like a first attempt of doing like a map of this place. It was done by Edward Seller, who has like very important depictions of the buildings, and this is very important because it was this map has more than 1 century, right? So he was aware. We have like a very nice snapshot of how the site looked like more than 100 years ago. Yeah, and this is important again because the site looks like this right now, right? So it's entirely covered by a forest, a rainforest. So it's a very difficult place to do any type of archaeology. So it's not that easy. It's very different from other sites, especially from other Zapotec sites that we can find, like for example Monte Alban, right, in which are located in places where the vegetation is not as dense as this one. It's still very beautiful. So anyway, so in that way, I began to develop my project, which is called the Yengola Archaeological Project, which I divided in two different paths of research. One path is being the archaeological research, and the other one an ethnographic study of the area. So the archaeological research has been divided in three parts. A first reconnaissance of the sites, focusing on the universe of buildings that I will be facing. A second stage, which is going to happen this summer, hopefully, which is going to be focused on the architectural and typological analysis. And I have scheduled for next year a LiDAR scan of the entire site. And in parallel, in tandem, I have done an ethnographic research in Tehuantepec, focusing with interviews with people that has produced some knowledge about the mountain, and this was on 2019, and also participant observation among people with some types of practices, either economical or cultural, in the mountain, and that was also done in 2019. So this for this first reconnaissance of the sites, I have like some specific objectives. As I mentioned, to understand the process of colonization of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec by the Zapotec group, right? That has been like the big question. So I have to make an analysis of the urban layout and development of this urban layout of the city, right? So I began to work with a hypothesis. So if the archaeological site of Yengola was part of a colonization process, the archaeological survey will show an intentional urban standardization, right? That will include an intentional landscape modification. So if this was part of a big project of the Zapotec states, I will see that standardization in construction, right? Because it will be part of a big project of the Zapotec kings, of the Zapotec nobility. But I found a lack of a standardization in the architectural features and the artifact assemblage. I will imply stronger decisions from the migrant colonizers, from the commoners, right? So I am trying to balance how the amount of agency that these people have. I began with a series of methods. For this reconnaissance, basically was to walk the place, right? To locating the architectural remains, artifact concentrations, geomorphological formation, etc., in order to create a GIS map, and also to populate that GIS with information of each building's assemblage, artifact assemblage. So in that way, I made a first analysis of the urban layout, or at least of an analysis of the distribution of the buildings that I found. So on this first season, I have some findings, right? So I was able to locate 494 archaeological features, and I was able to identify 3 urban clusters, right? Located in the northern part of the mountain and the northwestern part of the mountain, and the core of the sites that with this big group of buildings in the eastern part of the mountain. So some preliminary results that I found is that Gingola was a planet city divided by definite discrete areas, right? Allegedly barrios, or in Zapotec, yojo. So there was a planned use of the space and the mountain using its orography as an advantage for the location of different features such as terraces, walls, and domestic and public structures. But so how the city functioned, right? We know that scholars who have worked in Oaxaca have examined the urban organization in the 16th century Tehuantepec, which is likely the settlement inhabited by the Zapotecs, right, at the time of the Spanish conquest, and as the main town that was depicted on that Relación Geográfica that I showed. The Zapotec social organization in Tehuantepec was based on its households, or yojo, which were autonomous kin-based institutions, right? So these yojo were typically organized around the domestic compound, which is a series of buildings that surrounds a barrio, surrounded by rooms. Here, extended families cohabited and reproduced, and as families grew, the number of rooms around each patio increased occasionally, and if it's necessary, extra patios were built. So this is how we understand how the Zapotec cities in the early 16th century work, right? Where their minimal units where the families gathered in this yojo. We know that these kin-based institutions were important for the pre-Hispanic cities. For example, in this image that I am showing you is a depiction of the myth of foundation of the Nahua groups that migrated to central Mexico, also in the post-classic period. For them, they have like this mythical origin place, the Chicomostoc, which means the 7 caves. And that was like the place where they originated, right? So in each of these 7 caves, different kin that was like the place where these different kins inhabited, right? And they decided to gather and to start a migration that will lead to the foundation of other important sites like Tenochtitlan. So this organization towards barrios are very important. In that way, I designed a next phase of research, which is going to be focused on understand these clusters, right, of places that I have found, of buildings that I have found. So I decided to reach out and map with more detail 4 different clusters that of buildings that, in my opinion, can be like these pre-Hispanic yojos, these Zapotec yojos. So in that way, I will be able to understand how this city began to grow, right? So an important thing is that, and fortunately, the architecture in this site is still standing, and the surface of the city is covered with well-washed pottery, lithics, and other remains. So the use of photogrammetry, LiDAR, and high-definition photographs, in the sense, like the use of remote sensing techniques is going to be like a good approach to gather all these data, right? But if you have noticed, I have not spoken about any type of excavation or data, or of actually artifact collection, right? So what I decided not to take any archaeological material from the site, and this is very important for me, is like to understand how people relate with the site, with the archaeological site, right? So it's very common in these archaeological presentations, right? That we're talking about Zapotecs, ancient Zapotecs. We're talking about buildings. We're also, like, Zapotecs are still there, right? There's like 200,000 of them in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec just alone. So for me, it's very interesting to understand this relationship. So Tehuantepec and Liesa barrio, which is one of the modern barrios of Tehuantepec, though the people who live there is the actual owners of the site, right? There are the landowners. And this land is also owned in a communal way, right? So there's no like private property there. So it's a all the mountain belongs to that barrio, so or that neighborhood. So for me, it's always important to understand that, right? What is like their voice towards any type of research. This is also important because the mountain is in their stories and also in their practices, right? In cultural and economical. So they use the space in certain ways. So that has been like my question all this time. How do they interact with this place? So in order to have a sense of that, I developed an ethnographic research, which it was focused on interviews. I made a series of formal interviews to local painters, photographers, Zapotec archaeologists that live there, and craftsmen, people who have like who have spoken and some sort about the site. For example, here's like a mural where this painter made about the Yengola, right? So I interviewed her to understand why she did it, how the site has came to be something important in his work, on her work, sorry, and stuff like that. I also followed the daily activities that people have within the mountain. People goes there usually to hunt, to collect firewood, and to gather plants, right? So I joined this group of hunters, and I follow with them in their trips to find resources of the mountain, right? So within these trips, I learned several things, right? I understood that Giangola, it's a living being, and when I began to do this research, it was interesting that for me, Giangola was the archaeological site when I began to this research, right? We understand after following and to share like these trips with them that Giangola is not the archaeological site. This entire area, this entire space is a mountain. To do anything in that mountain, all activities that they made, for example, require a certain permission of the mountain, right? So they ask for permission to hunt, they ask for permission to collect plants. They always are telling, right, you should not take their treasures, which for them include they're not talking about archaeological remains or anything like that. They talk about the treasures, about plants, animals. You cannot take rocks, etc. And this is also an interesting thing that they said. You have to be honest with them and with the mountain. You cannot be hiding anything because the mountain is going to know that you are like there with bad intentions, right? In the image, for example, on the bottom left, this was when we began like a trip to the mountain, to the top part of the mountain. This was like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. They were like asking for permission for that day, right? For those days' activities, because they were about to collect wood from the top of the mountain. So they will have to ask for the mountain's permission. The mountain can punish you if you don't follow these protocols, or by the other hand, the mountain can reward you according with your behavior, right? So one way that the mountain can punish you is that the animals will disappear, accidents can happen, you can fall down, or a rock can follow you, because it's a mountain. You can get lost. They say like they have like these stories about like, oh yeah, I have an uncle who when I was a kid, he get lost for 3 days because he was mean with the mountain. But they also are aware that when good things happens is because they did things correctly, right? So they can be walking in the mountain. You can for some reason you suddenly can find a spring, right? Or an old path that you were not using. It will appear and will guide you to an animal, and you will return safe to your home, right? So those things happen because of the mountain's will. And are directly connected with your behavior that you have in the mountain. So for me, it's important to build this bridge between the archaeological projects, the archaeological activities, and people, right? And because we have to put things in balance. Archaeology is important, the material, the heritage, it's important, right? But Giangola is just one part of this incredibly rich Tehuantepec's cultural heritage. The work have revealed that the site plays an important part of this sacred landscape and demonstrated the importance of developing a non-invasive research design that records archaeological artifacts and engages with the Giangola landscape in culturally sensitive manners. Also, it's crucial to work closely with the community and land owners of the site to design a project that has their questions and needs in mind, paramount among their concerns in honoring and treating Giangola with respect. And if they are the landowners and have like this respect with the mountains, us as a scientist, we have to follow those protocols, right? In addition, the questions that this research will answer traces important events that undergird the community pride and local conception of self. For them, Giangola, it's very important because it was like this place of resistance against the Aztec armies, for example, right? So they want to know more about that part, right? So I have to be aware of those inquiries that they have by answering also my research questions. So this research also has demonstrated the importance of incorporating the internal procedures and methodological protocols that prioritize living artifacts in place rather than collecting them for analysis in a laboratory. But fortunately, new advances in technology and Giangola's excellent preservation makes this possible. I also aware that, this has been like a thing that has been like grounded in archaeology, right, for a while. For example, Ian Hodder, he wrote, right, that archaeology is a search for the meaning of the past, but that meaning has to be important for not just academics, right? It has to be meaningful for people. Silliman and Ring mentioned, for example, that archaeologists craft knowledge, right? But they are not the only ones who are also these crafters of knowledge. Other people, such as poets, painters, school teachers, children craft knowledge, right? And we are just one part of this collective who are spoken about the mountain. Some final insights. Well, the mountain is an active member of Liesa and Tehuantepec. It's like an elder that can lecture you, punish you, and you need to show respect to it and all that lives on it, right? So the directions from this feasibility work that I have done focus me to design a non-invasive survey project where I will not take any sample from its place, and all this research will be done by remote sensing. Also, it will focus on reconstructing the site with the help of local painters, poets, and other artists, which will be involved to communicate our shared knowledge with people in Tehuantepec. And well, I will be finishing here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, I don't know how many people are able to put things into the chat, and I know that our speaker can't see the chat, but I'm happy to read any questions from there. But also people can, raise their hand using that feature, and we can take questions that way. So what questions do folks have? Jonathan, do you have a?
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was really interesting, and there were a lot of questions I was kind of thinking in my head while you were talking there. You mentioned the 7 caves that were sort of like the mythical origin of the people that migrated there. Were those caves in the Valley of Oaxaca, or were they somewhere else in Tehuantepec, or do we know?
No, there's like this mythical time, and that a lot of nobility, of pre-Hispanic nobilities, say that yeah, it's like a common cultural nobility thing that was like shared not just by Zapotecs but by other peoples, right? So Nahuas in the central Mexico basin has also like these types of myths, and it's not a particular place. It's also is being like located in the north, right? Like, but there's not like a specific place where this Chicomostoc is located.
Wonder if it's Teotihuacan.
Exactly, Teotihuacan is like another place that it was like
those caves.
mythified, right?
Yeah, but they
In a
find
way.
those artificial caves right underneath the Temple of the Sun.
Exactly, and yeah, caves are always like an origin place, right? Other historians, for example, Lopez Austin has like related the caves with the womb, right, as a mythical place of origin, for example, right? So we have like those stories. We have to remember that Zapotecs were not like isolated from all these general Mesoamerican cosmovision, right?
Right.
Just the king of the Zapotecs, Cosijoesa, married her daughter with the son of Ahuizotl, for example, the king of the Tenochtitlan emperor, right? So all these nobilities were interconnected and shared certain like ideas and notions of where they came from. And Zapotecs were part of like this, rights in a way. So they have like also like shared like these myths of origin in some place in North. Yeah, it's kind of like blurry. We know more about the myths of the Nahua groups in Central Mexico, but probably the nobilities in southern Mexico like have like different similar things. But what it was important to me is to relate these myths with how the social structure um, was like founded on these families, right? And how this each family represent like a kin. So we can see those the importance of those kin-based institution in this or myths of origin.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I wanted to just invite other people to feel free to turn their video on so we can have a sense that we're all sort of in this space together. We see all your little icons at the bottom of the screen, but it's maybe a piece of the sort of social world that maybe other people are missing as well, which is a sense of sort of coming together for these conversations. So no obligation, but thank you, Dr. Markline. If other people would be happy to turn their videos on. Thanks, folks. And of course, if other people have questions, feel free to use the hand raise feature or put your question in the chat. I can read it, or turn your mic on.
I have another question. Do we know, or do you know why those structures were abandoned? I mean, this is post-classic, right? So this is already in the time of in the early colonial period, right? So are there any historical documents that talk about people living there, or is it just all like oral connections?
Well, it's very hard to, in my opinion, I think it's very hard to live in this particular place, especially because of how you gather water, right? So for me, this place is very related with that first wave of Zapotecs reaching to the isthmus and trying to control the land. So that's how you have like all these impressive city walls. It has like more than 3 kilometers of walls, right, that protect the core of the site. And talking with other historians and historians, we know that Tehuantepec was already established when the Spaniards arrived. So people didn't live in Angola at the moment of the contact. So what's I think is there's not much research done in that particular toward that particular question. In my opinion, I think that once that they were able to secure all these regions for themselves, the Zapotecs decided to go to move their city to where is now Tehuantepec, which is like in a more flattened space, and it's more difficult to defend, but they didn't have like that that need, right? But for example, when we have like the Mexica expansion, the Aztec expansion, we know that Zapotecs used this place again as a fortress. So the site was probably abandoned because of like a city, like a place to live, probably because of they were able to secure a better spot. But they didn't, and once that the Spaniards was like making a presence there, I don't think that they wanted to allow any population living in a mountain, and specifically one that has like fortifications and stuff like that. Yeah.
Thanks.
The questions looks like Lauren has a question.
Yeah, thanks for, telling us about all this. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the maps that you showed. So I was just wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit what the relationship is between the features that you can see on the map.
Sure. I can share my screen again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. So yeah, for example, this is my first map. So basically what I have here depicted is like all the archaeological features that I found. I just not found, I found more than buildings, right? I found like rock art. There's a lot of terraces over there. And they are like distributed towards this mountain, right? Can you see the cursor of the mouse cursor?
I can't.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well,
bottom of the scale.
Yeah. Well, this is like the mountain is like it's huge, right? So what I was able to find was like there's what we know about the site was basically the core of the site it's like in the east part of the mountain, but I was also able to find like other clusters of buildings in the north and in the northwest part. This is for an example of the city walls, no? Right here. Oh, here. Yeah, like this is like the focus of my research, or like what I understand like the core of the city. Basically the white dots are all those buildings that I am finding a relation with what we know as the yoho, right? Like these households, like these houses. So that's what I call them, like domestic architecture. They're basically like little rooms, like a complex of rooms, patios that are like distributed among like other little structures. The blue triangles are public architecture, either like there's like big temples. I found also other like platforms, things that talk to me, not talk to me, but they are telling me that their function is different of domestic, right? That's what I didn't want to call them, like administrative buildings or religious buildings. I just label them as public architecture. We have like these 3 dotted lines. Those are like city walls that, as I showed you in the previous picture, that are like, it's pretty neat to see that they are like actually fortification, right? Because they are not like these walls that could function as a terrace or something like that. They're like, they have like gates and stuff like that, and they're like located in a way that makes difficult to access like to the different sectors of the site. The green squares are like these terraces that I mentioned you. Yeah, I don't know if you have like any particular questions of some part of this map, for example.
Well, I was just wondering if there's any, I don't know, I guess if there's any spatial relationship between them, like why is something close to something else?
Yeah, well, I'm actually, that's what my research is going to be about, is like trying to
Okay,
understand
gotcha.
like the actual meanings of the urban layout, right? So far, what I have found is that the public architecture, it's have almost like the most important buildings are within the third city wall, right? So in that way, yeah, there's like a hierarchies of things that has to be protected and things that hasn't that are not going to be like protected like by all these fortified system. It's also interesting for me to after I made like this next stage of my research, try to identify the difference of the domestic buildings that are inside and outside the building, the walls, right? Why if there's like some connection related with social hierarchies and stuff like that. And I still, I'm usually not very interested in these relations of the of archaeoastronomic events, but I am also aware that in lots of pre-Hispanic cities, there's like a really important relation between for example, the cardinal points and how you understand the universe and how you build a city, especially the religious buildings and stuff like that. So I'm going to still work on that. Right now, my research questions are more related in the social structure more than in the religious and cosmological layouts of the city, but it will be part of my research. But so far, I will not dare to make like an assumption on any type of relationship.
Katie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I love this idea of the mountain being a living entity. There's something really wonderful about that, and I think that like definitely motivates people to be respectful of it. And I saw that most of your research is involving structures, like architectural structures, and possibly that's because artifacts can't be taken off the site. So I was wondering, first of all, I'm guessing people have probably taken things off the site without consent. But I guess my question was two-part, is whether people have been able to take them off to study them and research them and somehow put them back, or if there are ways that people digitize some of the artifacts that have been found in the space in order to bring that knowledge outside, while respecting the kind of the sanctity and like life of the mountain in effect without damaging it.
Well, usually the archaeologists that have worked there, which has been so many of them, but there has the last archaeological project that was there. It was done like 15 years ago, right? It was like a typical archaeological project in which you go. It was focused on restoration of certain aspects. It was made by the Mexican government. They arrived, they explored, and they took samples, right? And those samples are now in a storage in Oaxaca City, right? And they will remain there forever. There's some artifacts that were dug like in the 70s, and they're now the National Museum of Anthropology, and they just said offering from Yengola, right? And that there's no more further information about it. Usually people from Tehuantepec, they don't know that there's stuff there. So no, I mean, like people obviously take things, right? But I will not.
But you're trying not to and encouraging others not to as well.
Yeah, I think there's other ways to do archaeology, and there should be new. I mean, we are like in this point in which we cannot just keep reproducing these old practices, right? They're pretty colonial ways of doing archaeology. I mean, like you go do your thing because you think that you're like the light of knowledge, right? And then you're going to tell a story that is going to turn into the truth, right? So I think that those things have to change.
I think it's great, honestly. I think
Mhm.
you have the right mentality for it, so it's good to hear it.
What other questions do we have from folks in the audience? Yeah, Carrie.
Thanks so much for that. It was very interesting to learn more about your work. And I'm very interested in how you're taking this different approach to archaeology where you're not removing things from the site. So I guess to kind of follow up with what Katie was asking about, but I'm wondering what the local people think of your approach that way. And if do people really understand that you're like trying to do archaeology differently and that that's like rooted in you know, respect for people and that sort of thing? Like, what have your conversations been like with people that live there today about this?
Well, especially with a group of hunters and that I work with, they have been hired by other archaeological projects, right, to work in the sites, and usually they tell me like, well, they treat us as workers, you know, and they never think of us like someone that can have an opinion about the archaeological research, right? So I think, and in a way, I like that they have been aware of how the different archaeologists treat them, and I think they're like, I will not say that they're like, oh yeah, an archaeologist with a different worldview is going to arrive to here, right? I mean, they see archaeological projects as another source of income, for example, and I think that it will take time in order to see for them to see this particular project as something different. I think so far I'm another archaeologist who is maybe more communicative with them, right? But yeah, story of archaeology in Tehuantepec is usually focused on higher people, and that's it. That's like all the take that they have so far. But I don't know. So I consider them my friends. So at this point, so we have like always in communication, and at least that's something different that they have. I mean, they can reach me anytime and say something, but I don't know. What do they think specifically about my project? I think it will take a couple of years still to understand that. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Any other questions we have from folks? I actually had one. So since there's a pause here, I'll ask my question, which is or I'll let Trevor ask a question here and then I'll ask mine.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Earlier in the map, it had one of the icons for the key was about the rock art. What kind of rock art was it exactly?
Well, there's like actual paintings. There's like this rock wall, this natural formation. I will say that I cannot think in yards, but it will be like 40 meters long, 10 meters tall, filled with paintings. For example, there's rock carvings. There's just, for example, hand impressions. Some of them are like very located. Some of them are like extended. There's like actual Zapotec writing in rock art. So there's like a lot of things.
So there's a lot of variety of it. I didn't know if it was just one type or what it was.
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember this was at an actual town, right? So there's like always like people. I don't know how much time people live there, but it was for a while, right? So there you're gonna find like alteration of rocks. That maybe for us is rock art, for them it was just maybe someone just scrapping. But at the same time, you have like some of them that are related with the buildings. For example, there's like paintings just behind the pyramids, and there's like these big panels of paintings as well. So yeah, there's like all of that. I will need another research to just focus it on the probably.
That's all I had.
Great, thanks for that, Trevor. My question was actually kind of related, which is at the end you said that you were thinking of including artists in your project. I know you had interviewed them, but are you also thinking of having them help another way, like produce art related to your archaeology? I was just wondering if you could talk more about that connection to artists, because that's a really, I think, novel and fascinating approach.
Well, after we also have to remember that this region of Mexico was really hard affected by the 2017 earthquakes. It was devastated, right? And a lot of the colonial buildings in Tehuantepec were destroyed. So there was like this collective of architects that there's no money to reconstruct all of these buildings, so they began like a series of paintings of how Tehuantepec used to be before the earthquakes. So I began to talk with them, and I said like, "Hey, would you like to collaborate with me and try to, with the data that I will produce, could you reproduce the archaeological city as with your own views?" For example, they're like super hyped with that idea, and that's a way, for example, to move this project forward, right? And because I will just give them like inspiration, I guess, right? Like I found these buildings here, I thought that they would look like that, but they have also like an eye by themselves, right? That I will not stop them, but yeah. Muralists, for example, they also like work with as the painter that I showed you. She has also like made some paintings about the site, so I'm just going to give them more like my take on Giangola, and they will hopefully they will take that take and they will create something, which I think it's also like a valid standpoint of saying that how the city looked like, because I'm an archaeologist, but they also have like their own critic eye, right?
That's awesome. Thank you. Maybe have time for one more question if somebody else has something like to ask before we finish up. Last call. Well, I have lots of other things that I could ask, but I also know that we're getting close to 4 o'clock. So instead of launching into something else, I guess we'll just all give our virtual applause and very warm thanks for our speaker, and really wish you the best of luck in collecting the rest of this data and with the remainder of your dissertation research, and then looking onwards.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Suri, and thank you to the Anthropology department.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. We got another comment in the chat from my colleague Lisa, who says thank you as well. Well, folks, I'm going to stop the recording.